That's K-A-M-I-N. W.
solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
My name is Benjamin Wetzel. I'm a police officer with the City of Phoenix.
Could you tell us what your assignments have been at the City of Phoenix, sir?
I started in patrol. From patrol, I went to a quick response team. And then I started working with the Special Assignments Unit, which is the police department SWAT team in the year of 2000.
And from SAU in the year of 2000 to present, is that your current assignment?
Yes, it is.
Could you please tell us what the Special Assignments team is at the City of Phoenix?
I'm sorry.
I was looking down and walking away. What is SAU?
SAU is the Special Assignments Unit. Is essentially the SWAT team, which is a higher trained unit in special weapons and tactics. And we are highly trained in handling any kind of situation. The reason we call it the Special Assignments Unit is because we don't just do barricades, we do search warrants, we do dignitary protection, and any other kind of surveillance or special assignment needed for that kind of training or tools.
Is one of the main functions of the unit to safely take people into custody who may be of interest to law enforcement?
Yes, it is.
To conduct high-risk search warrants for detectives?
Yes.
And to apprehend suspects in different matters?
Yes.
Back in October, specifically I want to talk about October 15th of 2014, were you working with SAU that day?
I was.
And at that point in time, were you part of an assignment related to the address of 4251 West Vista Avenue in Phoenix?
I was.
Could you please tell us where West Vista Avenue is in Phoenix?
It's, I'm trying to remember exactly what street it's north of, but it's more toward the west side of Phoenix, bordering Glendale almost. A little bit, I'm trying to remember if it's near Glendale Avenue.
Your Honor, the state moves Exhibit 281, 282, and 283 into evidence at this time.
Without objection.
Exhibits 280, but not 280 itself?
Not 280, Your Honor.
Okay, 281, 82, and 83 are admitted and may be published.
Thank you, Judge. And for the record, 281 is images A through TT. Images 282 is images A through J. And Exhibit 283 is images A through F.
Thank you.
I'm going to put from 281 image C up on the animal. Does that help you in identifying area of town?
Yes.
And where exactly is that general area? Did you say West Phoenix?
Yes, it's the west area of Phoenix. It borders Glendale. Glendale generally begins around 43rd Avenue. So it's just to the east of 43rd Avenue.
And at that time, were you looking for any particular individuals?
We're looking for two people.
Who were you looking for?
Well, we were assisting detectives who were actually the investigators that were looking for.
Do you have your report in front of you?
I do have my report.
Would it refresh your recollection to look at your report?
But
Please do so, sir.
the people that they were surveilling for were Ramon Bueno and Danny Vargas.
And at that time, on that date, at around 6:31 p.m., was one of the individuals contacted?
Yes, he was.
And who was that?
Ramon Bueno.
I'm going to put Exhibit 281 Image C, up on the Elmo, awfully dark. Is that the residence that Mr. Bueno was found at?
It appears to be.
Tell us the circumstances as to how he was contacted.
After surveillance officers, detectives had identified that Mr. Bueno and Mr. Vargas were at the house, they called the Special Assignments Unit to assist with a search warrant for the residence. So we responded to the residence to secure it for the search warrant for the detectives. On our right, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Was there the use of what's called a Bearcat?
There are two armored vehicles. One is a Bear, it's the larger of the two, and a Bearcat, which is a smaller armored vehicle.
And were there marked units that were placed outside the residence
Yes.
prior to the contact of Mr. Vargas and Mr. Bueno?
We would roll up the Bear first because it's an armored vehicle, and we don't know if the people that we're contacting are armed. So we would use the armored vehicle to protect the police officers.
Where did the Bearcat go first before the contact with the individuals?
The Bearcat, which is a smaller vehicle, went to the rear of the house.
And the other armored vehicle?
It was pulled into the driveway. If you look at the picture where the truck is, and the driveway is running in front of the truck, the Bear armored vehicle was angled toward the house. So you're looking southbound. Looking at the front of the house, you're looking south. And so the Bear was angled in a southeast direction, near the driveway to the right of the picture.
And what are the circumstances as to how Mr. Bueno was taken into custody?
Mr. Bueno was in the outside the house, and he walked into the carport area, the covered area behind the truck. And at that time, he was directed by officers outside the Bear to put his hands on the wall.
And did he do so?
He did.
Was he compliant?
He was compliant.
Was he taken into custody
He was,
or arrested?
eventually he was. What happened was officers directed him to come back to the armor because officers won't approach the house, exposing themselves to potential danger. So they remained behind the armor, directed him back to their location where they took him into custody.
Was Mr. Vargas taken into custody that same day?
Yes, he was.
Tell us about the circumstances of taking Mr. Vargas into custody.
After Mr. Bueno was taken into custody, my task was as a negotiator. So I focused my attention on the house and started communicating to people inside the house, telling them that they need to come outside. And Mr. Vargas did comply with that. He walked outside eventually, and he was taken into custody with other people.
Approximately how many other people? Was there a third individual by the name of Pete Conyers? Was he taken into custody?
Yes, he was.
And what were the circumstances about how he was contacted?
All of them were contacted the same. They would walk out the front door of the house. They'd be directed to the location of the officers behind the armor, and they were taken into custody and then handed off to other officers who escorted them.
Was another individual who was in the home besides Danny Vargas, Pete Conyers, and Ramon Bueno, was there someone by the name of Anthony Murray?
Yes, there was.
And two women, Kayleen Stone and Crystal Luna?
Yes.
Now, approximately how many members of the Phoenix Police Department's different units were at that location when these individuals were contacted or arrested?
I'm not sure of the total number of people because there were detectives from the Fugitive Apprehension Detail, which is what it's called now, who were doing the surveillance, as well as patrol officers, I believe, might have been there. But the people that I worked with specifically, there were probably about 16 to 20 of the tactical unit.
And did you document over 25 in your report having been right there in that area when the defendant and others were contacted or arrested?
Yes, the people I documented as officers being at the scene in my report are part of the Special Assignments Unit.
Were there multiple supervisors on scene?
Yes, there were.
To your knowledge, was there a beating of Mr. Bueno when he was contacted?
Not to my knowledge.
Nothing further.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
You testified Mr. Bueno was outside, correct?
Yes, sir.
When you arrived?
I don't recall exactly if he walked out the door upon arrival, but at some point I did see him outside the house and walk into that carport area.
He complied with each and every order, correct?
He did, sir.
Did he have a firearm in his pocket, in his hand, in his waistband?
To my knowledge, he did not.
Before the folks in the house came out, did the robot go inside?
At one point it did. Some people came out before the robot went inside. And then there was a point, I believe, right before the last person came out, if I'm not mistaken, a robot was put inside the house to safely check to see if there are additional people inside the house.
Was a bandana put over the lens of the bear cat at any point?
Over the
Bandana to cover what it could see?
Over the robot?
Yes.
I was told by a tactical officer who was operating the robot, Officer Morrison, that something obscured the view.
Mr. Bueno was outside.
Mr. Bueno was outside.
And again, a peaceful arrest as arrests go? The arrest of Mr. Bueno?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bueno, did Mr. Bueno have a gunshot wound?
I never had actual contact with Mr. Bueno, nor did I see if he had a gunshot wound. I don't know.
Do you know if any of the occupants of the home had a gunshot wound?
To my knowledge, I don't know. I had no physical contact with anyone inside the house, only to talk over PA.
That wasn't your role?
That was not my role, sir.
Thank you, sir. That's all I have, Judge.
Ms. Dahl.
Thank you. You actually documented who came out in what order, correct?
I did.
And when did Danny Vargas come out of the house?
If I may look at my report to recollect that time,
Yes.
at 6:43 p.m.
Was that very shortly after Mr. Bueno was taken into custody?
Yes, it was, within approximately 8 to 10 minutes.
And then Pete Conyers came out the front door, correct?
He did.
Now, there were the 3 additional people in the house, right?
Yes, there are.
And was it during that interaction with the 3 other people in the house, Anthony Murray and the 2 women, Kayleen Stone and Crystal Luna, that there was the potential tampering with the robot that was in there to conduct surveillance of the home to ensure a safe and secure entry?
Yes.
Nothing further.
Thank you. I see no questions from the jurors. It appears there are none. Thank you, sir, for coming in today. That does conclude your testimony. You are excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Ms. Dahl, the next witness.
Thank you. The state calls Larry Martinez.
Mr. Martinez, if you could please come forward and be sworn in by the clerk.
Hello. Please state and spell your first and your last name.
Larry, L-A-R-R-Y, Martinez.
The testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So we got.
Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Martinez. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
This is Larry Martinez. I'm an engineer for Union Pacific Railroad.
Larry, were you working as an engineer at, I'm just going to say the train,
Yeah.
back on October 8th of 2014 in the early morning hours?
Yes, I was.
And before we go any further, do you know an individual by the name of Ramon Bueno?
No, I don't.
Do you know an individual by the name of Danny Vargas?
No.
But frankly, you got involved in this case when there was follow-up, is that right, with members of the train?
Yes.
Did you share with investigators what you saw in the early morning hours of October 8th? I'm sorry, yeah, October 8th of 2014.
Yes, I did.
And in fact, were you interviewed later that day at about 10:36 p.m. by Officer Nick Mosley on that same day regarding what you saw when you were working that evening?
I don't remember the officer's name, but yes, I was interviewed.
And did you actually listen to a recording of your interview that you did about 5 years ago prior to your testimony here today?
Yes, I did.
Did that help you remember things?
Yeah, most of it I remembered pretty clear, but yeah, refreshed my memory.
So tell us, in the early morning hours, around 3 a.m., what you saw when you were working on the train. Where were you?
We were just west of southbound frontage road on I-17. We stopped to work Wholesome Bakery, and I was facing west. The other two crew members were on the ground behind me, and so I was looking in the mirror at them.
Before you go any further, were you in the train?
Yes, in the cab of the locomotive.
How far up is the cabin of the train that you were in? And is it the engine?
You mean off the ground?
Yes.
It's about 10 feet.
And you have windows that you look out of?
Yes.
And you mentioned there's a rear window you can look in also?
There's a rear window there. I was looking in a rear mirror.
Did something catch your attention at that point?
Yeah, as I was watching the crew members, I saw headlights come around the corner of a building and started driving erratically down the access road.
What did you see?
I saw a gentleman running, and I didn't know if he was running from the car, away from it as it sped by. I watched the car go by, and then I looked back, and there were two gentlemen kind of crouched down in the bushes, grass, whatever.
Now, do you know if they got out of the car at the same time, or you're not sure when the second gentleman appeared?
I didn't see either of them get out of the car, but when I saw the car come around the corner, I noticed the gentleman, in the headlights, running. So I don't know when they got out of the car.
You said they were crouching. Where were they crouching, sir?
Along the building on the other, north of the tracks, there's tall grass, weeds, about 2 feet high. They were crouching down in that, and then after the car went by, they stood up and started walking towards the locomotive and crossed in front of it and kept on walking on the south side of the tracks all the way to 27th Avenue.
Did you notice what they were wearing and what ethnicity they were?
Yeah, they were both Hispanic males. Both were wearing dark pants. One had on a gray T-shirt. The other one had on a white, I called it a wife beater tank top.
And this is after you saw them crouching down in the grass?
Yeah, that was after they stood up and the car passed by.
And so the other person at that point had a wife beater T-shirt on?
Yes.
Was there something about that you saw, the person wearing the white wife beater T-shirt, that was important to you?
As they walked by, I noticed that he had a red spot, which appeared to be blood on the back of the T-shirt and tank top.
Did you watch the demeanor of the two men?
Yeah, they seemed jovial, happy, kind of laughing, talking as they were walking by.
Were they walking fast or walking pretty slow at that point?
Just a casual walk.
Did you see something or tell the investigators that you saw something on one of the men that evening?
I did say that I saw one of them, I couldn't remember which one, had a small bag of some kind.
Did you describe that bag previously in the interview with the officer that it was a black backpack?
That's what I heard on the recording.
So that's what you told the officer on
Yes.
October 8th?
Yes, it was.
5 years ago? That it was a black backpack?
Yes, it was.
Now later, you've had an opportunity to look at the surveillance footage. You no longer see that backpack at that point, do you?
No, I didn't.
And in fairness, you also didn't see on the video that was shown to you from your train them laying in the grass, right?
No, that was behind the camera.
In what direction were they walking as they passed across your train engine?
To walking across in front of it, they were walking like a southwest direction, and then they continued west along the tracks.
Now, you can't identify these two men, can you?
No, I cannot.
Did you just share with the officers what you saw that night?
Yes.
To the best of your ability?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, at this time, the state requests permission to publish, again, Exhibit 274. That's already been admitted.
No objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 274 may be published.
Your Honor, once again, we're having issues with this video. If I may have one moment.
Okay. For those of you in the jury box, if you want to stretch at this time, feel free.
Have you had to work with these videos before?
No, they're proprietary. They get downloaded or automatically uploaded to Omaha. So we don't ever see them.
Ms. Dahl,
Yes,
can you get it to appear on your screen?
I sure can. I'm playing it.
So is this one without sound?
No, this one has sound,
This one does have sound?
right?
Okay.
But it's not necessary to play because you just hear a train chugging along.
What I was going to say is if you take your laptop and you tip it up on the Elmo, you can have the video play and it will be seen by the jury. You could have the sound on your laptop on and they could hear. So it's not perfect, but it is a workaround.
I'm going to do that. Thank you. I think Mr. Lorenz and I both agree. It's always good to.
Yes, we do.
Martinez, can you see this?
Yes.
What are we looking at here, sir?
The car that I saw driving along the access road right there kind of fishtailed, went over tracks going into another industry. I thought at first it was going to high center. Usually cars do when they go for the tracks like that.
Is this what you saw?
Yes, it was.
And is this from the vantage point that you saw it, sir?
Yes, facing west. When I first saw the car, it was behind me to the east and then came up into view of the camera. And, tell you what you'll see on the camera on screen, or
If you just wait one moment, there may be
Yeah.
something else that, did you watch this morning?
yes, I did. And
In a moment, you may see something else. Those are two men that you saw.
yes, it was.
And the first man, the man that you described wearing a gray shirt, was he closest to the engine when they crossed over?
I couldn't see from where I'm sitting. I can't see. I didn't actually see him cross over. He sits up higher in the front window, and I sit about 5 feet back from where that is.
Now, at this point, did you see a weapon on any of the two men when they walked by?
Not that I noticed.
Did you see what was in their hands?
kind of the side that was towards me, but I said I was kind of watching them, watching my crew members on the ground behind me, kind of watching it all. I was talking on the radio, calling it into our dispatcher in the yard.
Did it appear that the man in the gray shirt may have had something in his left hand?
Like I said, I know I saw one of them with the bag, but I don't remember which one it was.
And at this point, there was no longer the bag on them, correct?
No.
Nothing further.
Thank you. Mr. Lorenz?
Thank you, Judge. Hello, sir.
Well,
Give me 1 second, sir. How are you? I think what you said was, or part of your testimony was, that when you saw them in the rearview mirror, one of them had a black bag, but you don't know which.
when I saw him with the black bag, I was turned and looking out the window.
Okay. But then when they went into the view of the camera, there's no longer the bag.
Not that I noticed, no.
You also told the jury that you think it looked like they were hiding from the car that was driving erratically down that frontage road, correct?
I didn't know if they were running from the car, if they were with the people in the car. When I first saw the car come around the corner, I saw one person running. After the car went by me, I looked back and there were two individuals hiding in the bushes.
Well, let's go back to my question for a minute. I think you testified that it seemed like they could have been hiding from that car,
Yes,
correct?
yes,
And you stand by that, correct?
yes,
Okay. And you, I think, radioed to the yard or headquarters about what you'd seen?
yes.
Do you know if anyone looked for that black bag?
I do not know.
One of the subjects or people had a white shirt, the other had a gray t-shirt, correct? Did you ever see the car come back by?
No, I did not.
All right. Thank you. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Thank you.
The man with the gray shirt on, was he bleeding?
Not that I saw.
It was only the man at that point with the white beater shirt on? Is that a yes, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
And the demeanor of the two men as they walked past you?
Like I said, they seemed kind of jovial, just talking like normal, kind of laughing.
Nothing further.
Thank you. I see no juror questions. That does conclude your testimony. Thank you very much for coming in. You are excused.
You're welcome.
Would you like to call your next witness?
Yes, Judge. At this time, the state calls Tara Zuckerbrow to the stand.
Good morning, Ms. Zuckerbrow. If you could please come forward and be sworn in by the clerk.
Hello. Could you please state and spell your first and your last name?
Tara,
T-A-R-A.
Zuckerbrow, Z-U-C-K-E-R-B-R-O-W.
solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself?
Good morning. My name is Tara Zuckerbrow.
What do you do for a living?
I am a DNA analyst.
Where are you a DNA analyst at?
I work for the Phoenix Police Department Crime Laboratory.
To have that position, and we'll talk about what the position actually entails, could you please share with us your training and background?
I have over a year's worth of specialized training that includes testing samples in the laboratory that you might encounter in casework and having a series of written and oral exams to demonstrate my competency. And I had a mock trial as part of my training to prepare for court testimony. I also have a previous employment in DNA testing, so the bulk of my training was in a different laboratory.
What is your educational background?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree from California Polytechnic State University and postgraduate coursework from the University of Florida in biochemistry and molecular and cellular biology.
Where did you go after you graduated and did that postgraduate work? Or if you did that as part of your professional?
So after I graduated, I got the job at the previous DNA lab and did the postgraduate coursework there because they were required courses to become a DNA analyst, and then got hired on with Phoenix after that.
When did you get hired by the Phoenix Police Department Crime Lab?
In 2012,
And when you got there, what were you hired as? What was your position?
a DNA analyst.
And have you been in that same subject matter field since 2012, and really including your time before your time at Phoenix?
Yes, I have.
What is it to be a DNA analyst? What is your responsibility, your position at the crime lab?
So a DNA analyst will take samples collected from a crime scene and test them for possible biological material to see if a DNA profile can be obtained. We have to interpret our results, or the DNA profiles, report those findings, and testify in court when necessary.
How do you maintain the integrity of the lab in terms of potential contamination issues, chain of custody, those types of protocols?
In the laboratory, we follow what are called clean techniques. That means I wear a lab coat, goggles, gloves, and a face mask while processing all evidence. When I'm processing samples, I process my known samples separate from my evidence items so that I don't have any cross-contamination there. I only open one sample tube at a time to ensure no contamination is occurring. We also have controls with every step of the process to ensure that each process is performing as expected. During the interpretation portion, once I've written my report, a peer of mine will do a technical and administrative review of my report to ensure that they are agreeing with my findings and making sure there isn't anything wrong with the report. Chain of custody means that we have the samples at all times in the laboratory are being documented. Their location is being documented, whether that be a secured locked evidence vault, the laboratory frozen storage, or an individual. So if I have the item of evidence in my custody, I have to scan it into my custody. So a chain of custody will show the integrity of the evidence at any given time in the laboratory.
What is DNA?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and it is the genetic information that is passed on from an individual's mother and father. It is what makes you unique and identifiable.
Can two people have the same DNA?
Yes, if you are an identical twin, you would be expected to have the same DNA profile. Other than that, then no.
If you're a paternal twin, would you have the same DNA profile?
No.
So that is the only situation where someone would have the same DNA.
Correct.
What do you do, or what do you need to come up with a DNA profile and make a comparison to an unknown DNA profile?
There are 4 steps in the laboratory that I do for the DNA analysis. The first one is called extraction, where we are breaking open any cellular material that may be present on the sample. You put the sample at that step through a series of heat, you add chemicals, in order to break those cells open and release the DNA. In the second step, it's called quantitation. That is determining approximately how much DNA is in the sample, or if there is no DNA in the sample. The third step is called amplification, which is making millions of copies of that DNA in order for me to be able to detect it, which is the fourth step, detection. That ultimately ends up in the DNA profile or the DNA results that we are interpreting and then making comparisons.
Do you need a known sample from an individual to know what their DNA is to make a comparison to an unknown sample?
Yes.
Frequently in law enforcement, are there court orders for personal identifying information where a buccal swab is taken from an individual?
Typically, when I receive the item of evidence, I'll have a description stating that it is a buccal swab from the name of the individual that it is collected from.
When you are looking and comparing unknown DNA samples to known DNA samples, how do you how are you assured that there is not confirmation bias?
When I do my interpretation of my evidence items, I don't even have the DNA profiles of the known individuals in front of me. I will do the interpretation, determine if I can interpret it, or if there are no results, or if they're inconclusive. If I've determined that I can make an interpretation on the item of evidence, I will write that all out on the electropharogram and then do my comparisons to any known sample submitted in that case, along with all of the staff in the laboratory to ensure that there is no contamination of staff.
Where do you find DNA?
DNA is found in the nucleus of all cell types in your body.
Are there better types of tissues or fluids within the body for finding DNA?
If there is cellular material left behind, whether it be blood, semen, saliva, skin cells, if there are cells with a nucleus in a sample left behind, then a DNA profile can potentially be obtained.
What factors, well, let me ask you this. If I am touching the juror rail right now and lift my hand off it, is my DNA going to be found where I put my hand down?
That is possible.
What are the factors? Well, sometimes you don't. Even if we saw me put my hand on the rail, my DNA may not be left here enough to analyze?
Correct. Just because I'm touching the desktop in front of me or you're touching the rail doesn't mean the methodologies we use in laboratory will have enough cellular material left behind to get a usable DNA profile.
What are the different factors that are taken into consideration regarding best places to find DNA and not as likely places or locations to find DNA?
With the touch aspect, once you've touched that area and you've moved your hand, I can no longer visibly see exactly where that individual touched. It becomes a lot harder to collect those items when you can't visibly see staining like you can with a red blood stain or a saliva stain, things of that nature. So touch DNA in general, you're kind of blindly swabbing the area and hoping you pick up enough to detect and then get usable information.
Are there environmental factors that are taken into consideration or that could affect it?
There are, yes, mold, any kind of fungus that if the sample is not dried properly, that can grow on, let's just say, a swab that was used to collect an item of evidence, can interfere with our testing. Bleach can interfere with our testing. UV rays, the sun, those types of things, excessive heat, those things can break apart the DNA that we're testing and make it less detectable, meaning our instrumentation cannot detect the results.
If there is oil or another substance on an item, does it make it more difficult to get DNA?
I suppose it could. I don't totally know the answer to that.
What about ammunition that has been spent, like a spent cartridge casing? Is that a good place to find DNA in your training and experience?
Typically not. The heat from a fired bullet will kill, or not kill, break apart the DNA to the point that we typically do not see usable results on bullets.
Talk to us about what frequency is when conducting an analysis of DNA? Does there need to be a certain amount of DNA for you to make conclusions?
There does. We have specific standard operating procedures and protocols that we have to follow, that the DNA has to be of specific heights and quality in order for us to make an interpretation.
In this case, do you remember being involved in the investigation involving Trooper Cruz Alfano and James Casey?
Yes, I do.
Why do you remember it so clearly, if you remember it clearly?
I do. It was for us in the DNA section, it was considered a rush situation where they asked for volunteers to work on the case potentially overnight because of the severity of the case.
And in this case, were there multiple items that were tested at the crime lab for lady prints, DNA, and anything else that could be identifying to who was involved in this shooting?
Yes.
And in fact, would your involvement in this case span at least 2.5 inches of reports, notes, paperwork, lab results?
Yeah, I have a very thick case file, yes.
I want to talk to you about the DNA analysis that was done by you and other members of the Phoenix Police Department Crime Lab in this particular case. In this case, were you involved in the DNA analysis of multiple items that you knew came from a vehicle that had been searched?
Yes.
And even though multiple items were tested in this particular case, was there enough DNA on all of these items to come to a conclusion?
No, there was not.
Were there known buccal swabs from many of the people who were involved in this case?
Yes, there were.
Would that include Vanessa Martinez, Lori Richardson, Danny Vargas, Ramon Bueno, and Valeria Jaime?
May I refer to my report?
Yes, please do. Thank you. And multiple other individuals.
Yes.
Was there also an analysis done of 4 unspent cartridge casings that had been collected?
Yes, there was.
And was there an analysis done of an unspent cartridge casing that had been collected in the rear driver's side door of a Mercury Sable? Or I could refer to it by item number.
That would be
29.
helpful.
Was it
29, got it.
29.
Yes.
Let's start with that. Was there anything that could help in identifying in this case who may have touched those 5 items? The spent shell casing found in the car and the 4 that were found and recovered unspent.
I did not obtain any DNA results off of those items.
Does that mean that no one touched those items?
Not necessarily.
But you tried?
Yet they were put through the DNA analysis process and no results were obtained.
What about the cutting from a t-shirt? I'm going to refer to it, item number 1.01 that had red and brown stains on it. Did that come back to being identified as belonging to a known profile?
Yes, it did.
And the stains on the white t-shirt, who was that a match for?
Item 1.01, a DNA profile was obtained that matched the DNA profile from Danny Vargas.
Was there a cigarette that was analyzed, item 1.02A? Did that come back as belonging to an individual?
You said 1.02A.
Right.
Yes, it did.
And do you have supplement 14 in front of you?
I have my request number 58.
Would that be consistent with part of a cigarette that was recovered in the front driver's side interior door of a car?
All it says for me is cutting from part of a cigarette.
Okay. Could you tell us what it means to be a major contributor as it relates to DNA analysis?
Yes, oftentimes with our DNA testing, the results will be a mixture of more than one individual. So a major contributor means that I am able to look at the DNA results and see I had spoken earlier about certain peak heights that the data has to be at, and a major contributor would be taller peaks, and I'm able to pick apart the DNA profile and determine a major component to that DNA profile.
Was there a cell phone cover that was analyzed that came out of that same impound number, item 3.02A?
Yes.
And what was the result of the analysis of that item?
I obtained a mixture on that item as well.
And was the major component identified?
Yes.
And who did that belong to?
That matched the DNA profile to Lori Richardson.
Now, there was, and I'm going to put from Exhibit 283. Image F up on the Elmo. Was there an analysis done of item 16 from that same impound?
Yes, there was.
And item 16, what did you conclude regarding that item in the DNA?
The DNA profile obtained from that item matched the DNA profile from Valeria Jaime.
I'm now going to turn to image A from that same impound. Were you able to conclude anything about item number 9?
I'm not seeing item number 9 on my report.
Could it have been a jug, mouth and interior of the cap?
Okay, referring back to my previous report, yes, I did.
And who did that profile match?
Lori Richardson.
And what about a ceramic mug, item number 17? Did that have a major component that matched an individual?
Yes, ma'am.
And who was that?
That one matched Valeria Jaime as well.
Were there multiple items within the car that matched Lori Richardson's profile?
Yes, there was.
I want to talk to you about item number, let me ask you this. Did you try to get DNA profiles from the doors, the door handles, or you and other investigators through the analysis process and working with the detectives, try to get, for example, DNA off of the door handles to identify anyone who may have gone in and out of the vehicle?
Items of that nature were put through the DNA analysis process, yes.
But was there anyone that could be identified due to the complexity of the mixture?
On those particular samples?
Yes. Specifically, I'm talking about the rear passenger side interior door.
No, those were too complex to interpret.
Additionally, the front passenger side interior door.
That would be item 39?
Yes.
Correct. Those were too complex to interpret.
And item 38, the rear driver's side door.
I actually did interpret a major component on that.
And who did that, and that was a mixed DNA profile, correct?
Correct.
And who did that come back to?
Lori Richardson.
Item number 10. What conclusion did you come to regarding item number 10? I'm going to your report dated March 19th of 2015.
A mixed DNA profile was obtained off of that item.
Was there a major component of this mixed DNA profile?
Yes, there was.
And who did that belong to, ma'am?
That matched the DNA profile of Ramon Bueno.
And what is the probability of selecting an unrelated individual at random matching regarding the major component of the DNA profile at 12 of the 15 loci?
That would be, I would expect 1 in every 6.8 quadrillion individuals to also have that match, that same DNA profile.
How many zeros are in a quadrillion?
There are 15 zeros after that number.
I have nothing further at this time.
Mr. Lorenz?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Zuckerbrow.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. I just have a couple of questions for you, just to help me understand some of your testimony.
Sure.
Let's say two people are holding hands, and one of those people touches an item, and then you swab it for DNA. It doesn't always work, the transfer, correct?
Correct.
But it can work,
It can.
and it's not uncommon, correct?
It can happen. I would have to test the item of evidence to know.
Yeah, but it's not out of the realm of scientific possibility.
It is possible.
It's not even close to being impossible that it occurs.
It can occur, yes.
Could that explain a mixed sample with a dominant and a less dominant DNA appearing?
If we're talking about an individual's hand and a DNA profile being transferred to an individual's hand, it would depend. The amount of transfers that occur, the less DNA that you're leaving behind during each transfer. If you're swabbing the palm of an individual's hand, it would not be surprising to have a major component matching the individual that owns that hand and perhaps picking up trace DNA from any other objects that individual might have touched.
Thank you. That's all I have, Judge.
Thank you.
Let's talk about major and minor contributors. Tell us what the difference is to a profile that's found, or a mixed, I'm sure, a mixed profile that's found.
So the major component, again, for my interpretation purposes, would be the individual peaks. I'm looking at a graph. That is what the DNA profile looks like. There are peaks along the graph. Once I've determined there is a mixture, I will look at the peak heights. So how tall are these peaks compared to these peaks down here? The major component is the one who has the taller peaks. So I will then interpret the profile, look at the major calls at every single location that I'm testing, and determine who my major component is.
Would that mean that it is a stronger profile?
I would expect major components to be from a biological source, a fluid, cellular material, versus trace pickup is typically where we see our minor components.
What is trace pickup? These
So-
are technical terms.
Yes, so that is the transfers that we're talking about. So if I'm touching an object that's sitting here, am I leaving my DNA behind? Maybe, but am I also picking up any other DNA that may be on that item? Am I picking that up and having it on my hand? So if I swabbed my hand, is it possible that I might have minor components that would show up with my major component from the palm of my hand? That is possible, yes.
So what it is we hear on TV and on CSI, these television shows, and Israel, what is touch DNA?
So touch DNA was simply what we were talking about earlier, where I'm touching the desktop here, I'm touching it. So am I leaving my skin cells behind enough so that if somebody came along and swabbed where I just touched, did I leave enough to get a usable, interpretable DNA profile behind?
Major components versus the trace, minor components. Major components, would you expect that that person had more contact with that item, or more fluid or DNA was left behind based upon potentially temporal time with it?
Yes, the more an individual handles an item, I would expect more of their DNA profile to be left behind it. So an object that somebody owns, I would expect, if they're handling it a lot, that they would leave their DNA profile behind on it.
Nothing further.
Thank you. We do have a series of juror questions. Thank you. Counsel, please approach. Counsel, please approach. First question. DNA peak detection is done by a human analyst. There's no software or automation used?
There is software. The graph that I was telling you about is produced with the software that we use, and it determines what we call RFUs, or the relative fluorescent unit, the height of that peak. So no, the analyst is not determining that height.
During the DNA, quote, amplification, close quote phase, it multiplies the DNA in the ratio the DNA was found?
It does not. It exponentially increases with every cycle of amplification. So there are 28 cycles that occur during the amplification phase. So if there's a certain amount of DNA in that item, it is going to exponentially increase with every single cycle of that amplification.
Did you do all the DNA analysis on this case, or was some processed by someone else?
I did not do all of the DNA analysis. I did this with a partner of mine.
What is a buccal swab?
A buccal swab is a known sample taken from an individual, and it is the collection of the cheek cells inside the individual's mouth. They're called buccal cells, which is where the term comes from, and it is a Q-tip that only has one cotton end that is collected from the inside of an individual's cheek.
Were any items that were tested matched to the defendant other than the laptop?
No.
Are you saying that the chances of the DNA on the laptop being from someone other than the defendant is only 1 in a quadrillion?
The major component matches at the interpretable loci. So at those locations, 12 of 15 that I tested, I would expect 1 in every 6, referencing my notes, 6.8 quadrillion individuals to also match that same DNA profile at those 12 of 15 locations.
What was the source of the DNA on sample number 10? What type of cells?
I do not know the answer to that.
Would it be fair to say that the person who owned or used the laptop more would leave a more dominant DNA profile on the item?
Yes, as I had stated before, the more you handle an item, specifically an object that you own, if you're handling it every single day, I would not be surprised to see your DNA profile on it.
If I sat in a vehicle with a t-shirt on, bare arms, would you expect to find my DNA on that seat?
It's possible. I would have to test it.
The witness stated that it can be difficult to detect DNA on bullets. But for clarification, was the witness's statement referring to DNA that had been transferred prior to a bullet being fired but tested post-firing, as opposed to DNA transferred to a bullet cartridge post-firing and tested?
So what I was referring to is the individual who's handling the bullet prior to being fired could potentially be leaving their DNA behind. However, during the process of it being fired, the heat that occurs could destroy the DNA that would be on that bullet. Now, if somebody comes along after the fact and picks it up with their bare hands, or perhaps that bullet fragment is sitting in a pool of blood or something along that nature, I would expect to see a DNA profile, or it could happen. But oftentimes we will get cases where we test a fired casing and we don't get results off of them.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have. Ms. Dahl, do you have follow-up?
You tried on multiple items in this case to test it, correct?
I tested multiple items of evidence, yes.
And in this case, when you're testing it, you're not looking for a particular profile. You're getting your information first, right?
Correct.
And then, after having that documented, comparing it to other known samples.
That is correct, yes.
And in this case, you tried to get it off of the 4 unspent shell casings, right?
Yes,
Cartridges, I should
those
say.
samples were put through the DNA process, yes.
And the one that had been spent, right? Correct. And you couldn't compare it to anyone, even though you tried, right?
There were no DNA results to make any sort of comparison.
Nothing further.
Mr. Lorenz?
Questions? Thank you.
No further questions from the jurors? Then that does conclude your testimony. Thank you very much for coming in. You are excused.
Thank you.
Ms. Dahl, is this a good time for a break?
Yes, Judge, thank you.
We are going to take our lunch break early. We will be back at 1:30. Please remember the admonition applies. Do not discuss the case over your lunch break. Enjoy yourselves, and we'll see you in about an hour and 40 minutes.
All rise for the jury.
It's okay.
Please be seated. What comes next, Ms. Dahl?
I will be resting. It will be Thomas Bertoni. He's the person who documented the search warrant that occurred where the defendant was arrested, and then James Casey.
Okay.
Potentially Reynaldo Cruz, Judge, very briefly, and I'll make that determination over lunch, just to briefly recall him. But that would be it.
Okay. And
I expect we'll be done by today.
you
From
think
the
we will
city.
conclude with the testimony today? All right. Well, I will say the court circulated to both parties last night the proposed form of jury instructions, final jury instructions. In that email circulating the instructions, I did make a note that the court remove the definition of dangerous offense because I felt that it was more appropriate to have that finding made in the aggravation phase. The state agrees?
Yes.
And defense agrees?
We do.
In addition, the instructions included everything the state requested but for dangerousness, and then included the defense's request for mere presence. Was there anything else that you wanted changed in the jury instructions that I circulated last night?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
So what we will do is we will have those copies available as soon as the state rests. I imagine there will be a Rule 20, is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
If the court does not grant the Rule 20, then we'll need a decision from the defendant as to whether he's going to testify.
Correct.
Although we may get to complete with the presentation of the evidence today, do we think that finish early enough that we're going to proceed with the reading of the jury instructions?
Yes.
Okay. So can I have counsel please approach? And then my final question pertaining to those jury instructions was, at the end of the proposed form of jury instructions, I did include the verdict language, recognizing I collapsed the related accounts into a single page. Does the state agree with the proposed verdicts?
Yes, and I knew what you meant by that. Thank you.
Okay, same with the defense?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so we'll get those verdict forms ready as well. Is there anything else we can do before we break for lunch?
No, thank you.
Your Honor.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you back. And if we could come back, if we could all come back at 1:25 so that we can hit the ground running at 1:30. They've had plenty of time for lunch, so
Thank you.
thanks.